Thanks for joining us on the news. I'm Ruth Aguele. My sign language interpreter is Franklin Efe. Let's start with the headlines. The U.S. Vice President concludes visit to Ghana, renews commitment to African development. King Charles arrives Germany on bilateral visit to address German Parliament Thursday. And President Buhari swears in new chairman of Police Service Commission. All right, we'll begin from the global scene. One major focus of U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris' visit to the African continent is the bulging youth population, as it is estimated that roughly half of the world's population is going to be in Africa in the next few decades. Evidently, 80% of those who attended the public lecture at Black Star Square were youth. Before the U.S. Vice President spoke, some notable African youth leaders, the likes of Moses Kofi and Shamima Muslim, made presentations about the development of youth and women.
The Black Star Square, particularly the Freedom and Justice Arch area, was taken up by mainly young people from tertiary institutions and youth groups in the country. Before the U.S. Vice President took the podium, two African youth personalities took turns to address their fellow youth and women.
It is very worrying to know the number of youth who are on the touchline waiting for the next opportunity to exit the continent. Let us decide on what pasture we want to grow. Get the seeds and plant them. I encourage you to go out there and be intentional about what you do. Your time, indeed, is now.
We will lift this continent up and set it on progressive ways.
After the lecture, some of the participants shared their impressions.
As we can see, she's a major champion of human rights and inclusiveness for women. And for me, that gives me hope. It gives me the belief that there's a better future ahead for women.
She mentioned that they are coming to partner with Ghana. They are not coming to partner for Ghana. So it made me very, very happy that they are not coming to impose on us.
They said we should live by ambition and also lead by conviction.
She empowered the women, she empowered the youth, and she inspired us as a country.
Adding more ladies to the workforce so that they can get different avenues and business opportunities. Those are good itineraries that she's brought.
Africa is past the stage whereby we have, powers come here and then we end up in terms of our minerals and our resources are taken without it benefiting its own people. So if there is any new way of doing things, it has to be equally based partnership.
All right, still on that, it was an Akwaba Dober by the chiefs of Cape Coast and the Oguwa Traditional Council who sat in state to welcome U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. The visiting second family of the U.S. had a feel of the Cape Coast Castle, which featured prominently on Ghana's tourist destination map. Vice President Kamala Harris noted that though the Atlantic slave trade has some historic significance, Africa must move on and creatively build Ghana's future for the younger generation for development.
The proverbial Ghanaian welcome was accorded to the second couple of the U.S. on arrival in the historic city. Vice President Kamala Harris was grateful for the warm hospitality for her entourage. She said, though the Atlantic slave trade has some historic significance, Africa must move on to build a future for the younger generation.
The work that you have done here in terms of prioritizing and having such success with education is something that in my own country of the United States and around the globe we know must be a greater priority for all of us. And that includes using that education as a way to help people around the globe understand the connections and the interconnections and the interdependence by extension.
The Central Regional Minister, Mrs. Justina Marigold Hassan, and the people of Cape Coast are optimistic that the U.S. Vice President's visit will spur on an economic and tourism boost and enhanced international recognition. She therefore called for support from the U.S. government for education and youth development programs.
Coupled with a commitment to strengthening and promoting educational interest in science, technology, engineering, support through the proposed investment in Africa will strengthen us to prepare our children for today and tomorrow's highly technological environments.
The Ogwamahin Osaberima Kwesiata mentioned plans by the Traditional Council to put up a slave museum in Cape Coast and was hopeful that a Vice President will consider making it her legacy project for the people and all visitors.
We want this talk to be turned into something more concrete. There is a plan to build a slavery museum, and we want you to be part of that museum. This will tell the whole story of the African transatlantic slavery trade.
All right, President Akufo-Addo has commended the U.S. and France for supporting Africa's call to reform the UN and urged the other permanent members of the UN Security Council, UK, Russia and China to do the same. Hosting U.S. Vice President at a dinner at the Jubilee House in Accra, President Akufo-Addo said amending the UN will give Africa a permanent seat at the UN Security Council where important decisions are taken.
Akwaba, the Ghanaian way of saying welcome, fills the visitor with the warm ambience and culture of the land. And as a nation that prides herself as the most hospitable in Africa, it was not out of place for President Akufo-Addo to host his guest, the Vice President of the U.S., Kamala Harris, at a dinner at the Jubilee House. President Akufo-Addo reiterated his call for reforms at the UN, which will give Africa a seat at the Security Council as a permanent member.
We are committed to Africa's common position on UN reform based on the Azulwini consensus, and are anxious that the matter of UN reform finds its way back quickly to the center of the global agenda. I'm pleased that good progress is being made on the reform of the UN Security Council, which has been given a great boost by the decision of US President Joe Biden to embrace the reform process, the first time a US president has explicitly done so. I'm hopeful that the leaders of the other three P5 members of the Security Council will soon follow his lead, just as French President Emmanuel Macron has done. The time has come for the global community to undertake this much-needed reform, which will bring greater effectiveness to the work of the United Nations and the Security Council in the maintenance of international peace and security.
Vice President Kamala Harris paid glowing tribute to President Akufo-Addo for his efforts in encouraging African Americans to return to their ancestral homes in Africa.
Hundreds of thousands of Black Americans and members of the diaspora around the world came here 4 years ago to participate in the Year of Return. And because of you, members of the diaspora and those around the world have traveled to Ghana to remember the history of slavery, those who have come here to honor their lineage and to understand their ancestry. And now, through Beyond the Return, many more visit each year. Your vision, Mr. President, made this possible. So on behalf of all of those who have made the return, all those from America who join you tonight, and all those who will return in the future, thank you, Mr. President.
The visit of the U.S. first female vice president, who is of African descent and who chose Ghana as a launching pad on a one-week tour to the continent, is a pointer to the deepening of ties between Ghana and the U.S.
All right, joining us in the studio for further discussion on the visit of the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris to Africa is former diplomat, he's a former diplomat, ECOWAS Commission, Mr. Haruna Warkani. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Warkani, thank you for joining us on the news.
Thank you.
All right, now, not too long ago, we had the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, visited Africa, and now we're having the U.S. Vice President, which is a big deal, actually. Of what significance are these visits to the African continent?
Well, America and Africa have historical ties, just like Kamala Harris has said. Though somehow a bad history, one would say. But significantly, you see, there is still a struggle or scramble for Africa between the world powers. China is increasingly becoming very active on the African continent, and so to balance the issues of trade, industry, and influence, America is also not resting on its oars, and therefore Africa has been declared as the next frontier in the sense that large parts of industrial, agricultural materials actually come from Africa. And you can therefore understand why the world powers are very, very interested in Africa. It is not just for friendship, it is for their national interest, to promote trade, industrial manufacturing, and sustainability of existing industries. If you take just one single mineral in Africa, lithium, without it, a lot of the EV car industry would perhaps not function. Therefore, strategically, these countries are already mapping out portions of Africa for their own influences.
Okay, but we've seen visits like this, you know, in the past. From your perspective, what makes this one different?
Well, essentially for the number 2 person in America to be visiting Africa, surely it has some significance politically, economically, and socially. However, we as modern day Africans must also be wary of whatever is going on, because we would have been representing what our forefathers did by partaking in the scramble for Africa. However, we can make very good gains out of this by asking the right questions and demanding the right steps that needs to be taken.
Okay, Mr. Warkani, let me just hold your thoughts there. We're having another guest to join us from Ghana. He's a research fellow, Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, Dr. Ken Ahursu. He's joining us via telephone. Dr. Ahursu, thank you very much for joining us on the news.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, this is a big deal certainly for Ghana. Having the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris began her tour of Africa in Ghana. Now, what makes this country, talking about your country, strategic to the rest of the world?
Well, the line is not very clear, but the visit of the Vice President being the first woman and a woman of color visiting Africa, and for that matter, Ghana, it's a special occasion. There have been several head of states from United States of America who have visited during the time of President Ron, President Kufuor, and then President Mills. But this time around, Ghana has not been chosen largely because of its leadership in Africa in terms of Pan-Africanism or African liberation, or because of democracy. Ghana was chosen together with Zambia and Tanzania because these 3 countries are the most indebted countries in Africa, and countries that have faltered on the payment of their debt to their debtors. This visit is happening during a time that we are seeing the re-emergence of a kind of Cold War. The war in Ukraine and the crisis that United States of America has with China. And Ghana being a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council is very important. But then we have to contextualize the visit to see if this is for the promotion of African solidarity or Pan-Africanism, or promoting it because of Ghana's unique position, or it is for the pursuance of U.S. foreign policy.
All right.
And in these terms, yeah.
Okay, I know you want to say much, Dr. Ahursu, but we'll have limited time. But if you quickly tell us, you know, the U.S. Vice President also pledged much commitment to the development of Africa. Now, should Ghana and other African countries have a cause to celebrate this visit?
Yeah, I can't hear you very clearly. I'm sorry.
Repeat my question again so you could hear me well. I said, should Ghana and other African countries have cause to celebrate, going by the fact that the U.S. Vice President has pledged commitment to development for the African continent?
Well, the question is it's a plan in the sense that when countries are pursuing a foreign policy, the Vice President is talking of the long-term development of Africa. The U.S. foreign policy, as we know, depends on who is at the helm of affairs. For example, when we have President Trump, he hardly mentioned anything about Africa. And now we have the Democrats with Biden in charge. So if after 4 years Biden is not in position, Americans don't have permanent interest. They have national interest, and that is the issue. So many things have been talked about, for example, climate change, the youth bulge, a sustainable economic development, promoting women's entrepreneurship, digitization of the economy. All these things are things that sound well with Ghanaians and they want it to be.
Okay.
But then the concern, as I have said at other places, is that the U.S. Vice President has also suggested that they are going to leave an economic advisor to advise the Ghana government. And in the history, in our relationship with United States of America, in 1967, when we have the National Liberation Council that overthrew Kwame Nkrumah, and then we have the DP government or the progressive government of Abuja. There have been these concept that we call co-opted economic diplomacy, which rings large with the French version of what we call Fra-African.
All right,
so
Doctor.
Some of it is that are they going to leave an economic advisor who directs how Ghana's foreign policy goes?
Okay, Dr. Ahursu. Dr. Ahursu, I'm afraid we have to leave it there for now. Indeed, it's okay.
Your lines are not good, and we have to stop here. I don't know what exactly your focus is.
Okay. But we do appreciate you joining us on the news. Let's just hope African leaders will take advantage of that. Okay, he's gone. The line is out. That was Dr. Ken Ahursu from the University of Ghana joining us via telephone in Ghana. So I'll get back to you now, Mr. Warkani. You've heard, I'm sure you picked a beat. I don't know if you picked a beat of what Dr. Ahursu said, but the U.S. has backed the ongoing reform of the United Nations. Of what significance are these reforms to Africa, especially now that the clamor for permanent seat for Africa is getting louder? Dr. Warkani.
Thank you. And viewers, well, it's been a struggle for Africa to have a reform of the United Nations. Surely the continent, having been absent at the Security Council, means so much for Africa, because that is where decisions at the highest level possible in the world is taken. Therefore, the agitation for this reform had been on for quite some time. And such a visit, not naturally, should elicit debate in this area, and we hope as she goes back home, she should take the message that yes, we are still waiting for the United Nations to effectively provide that reform. And America's foreign policy position should influence such a decision at the United Nations.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Haruna Warkani. He's a former diplomat and ECOWAS Commission. Thank you very much. Let's hope that African leaders take advantage of these opportunities as they present themselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's go on a break. We're back to pick up with the news. Stay tuned. Thanks for staying tuned. The new chairman, Police Service Commission, Dr. Solomon Arase, has been sworn in, also sworn in 5 newly appointed members of the Code of Conduct Bureau. President Muhammadu Buhari performed the ceremony before the commencement of the weekly meeting of the Federal Executive Council. Let's get details now from State House correspondent Adam Sambo.
The new chairman, Police Service Commission, Solomon Arase, retired in 2016 as the 18th Inspector General of Police. While in service, the PhD holder in law was at various times head of the Criminal Intelligence and Investigations Department, Force Intelligence Bureau, and Secretary, Presidential Committee on Nigeria Police Reforms. The former IGP also served as member of the Committee on the Prevention of Torture based in Geneva, Switzerland, that developed a universal protocol on investigative techniques.
We will ensure that we continue to put our international and local expertise at their disposal. I will be strong on training, retraining in different areas, especially alternative dispute resolutions. And the issue of discipline will be taken very seriously. I will not want a situation where civil transactions are criminalized. So anybody, any officer who, steps out of the line, there are going to be consequences. When you respect people who work for you, even your dogs, when they see you, they wag their tails. Sure. So we must take the interest of the Nigerian police officers into consideration, and we will douse the issue of corruption.
President Buhari also swore in 5 members to fill existing vacancies in the Code of Conduct Bureau in exercise of powers conferred on him by Section 154, Subsection 1 of the Nigerian Constitution. They include Murtala Aliyu Kankiya from Katsina State, Zephania Ishaku Bulus Nasarawa, and Farouk Umar Yobe State. Others are Taufik Olawole Abdusalam from Ondo State and Professor Juwairia Badamasiu, Kogi State. The chairman, Code of Conduct Bureau, Professor Isa Muhammad, witnessed the ceremony.
Every one of these members is going to have a responsibility to discharge. It's going to have its own assignment. So by this, we are not going to expect any gap in the discharge of our duty or mandate as a pioneer anti-corruption agency. There are people that are experienced and well-versed. So what we are expecting of them is delivery, service delivery.
And at the instance of the president, a moment of silence was observed by the Federal Executive Council in honor of the late General Oladipo Dia. General Dia, who died recently at the age of 78, was Chief of General Staff and Vice Chairman, Provisional Ruling Council under the Abacha military regime. From the State House, Adamu Sambu, NTA News.
The federal government has restated its commitment to making the process of applying and obtaining the Nigerian passport seamless. The Minister of Interior, Rauf Aribishola, stated this while inaugurating a passport office and production center of the Nigeria Immigration Service at Ilesa, Osun State. Femi Afariogun reports.
This new Ilesha Passport Front Office, inaugurated by Minister of Interior Ogbeni Rauf Aregbesola, was born out of the determination of President Buhari's administration to meet up with the surge in the number of passport applications. Aregbesola appealed to new applicants of Nigerian passports to be wary of scammers.
It is a non-judgmental center, meaning that no decision will be made here. But the application and biometric data of the applicants will be collected and forwarded to the Nigerian Immigration Service for processing and issuing. It is important also that they apply by themselves at the Nigerian Immigration Service portal, which is online, and not through touts and unscrupulous officials, which often bring act aids.
The production center in Ilesha is unique
in the sense that it's the only center where state capitals will be producing their passports. Ilesha is being treated as a state.
Osun State Governor Senator Ademola Adeleke, who described the Minister of Interior as a worthy son of the state, pledged to support the ministry.
I assure the Nigerian Immigration Service of our government readiness to support for the service in the discharge of its mandate.
Similar passport front offices spread across the country, and Nigerian missions abroad have been opened where enhanced passports are being rolled out. From Ilesha, Femi Afariogun, NTA News.
Flowing from the ethnic division which characterized the 2023 general elections in Lagos State, a civil society group is appealing to Lagos residents and all Nigerians to put the election behind and build a more united nation. Leaders of the South East Igbo APC Progressives Roundtable are concerned about the ethnic and tribal politics, which has created unnecessary tension in Lagos, and called on all Lagosians of goodwill to be their brother's keeper. The group cautioned those describing Lagos as no man's land to guide their utterances, knowing that Lagos is a Yoruba land.
Friendship is a burden that weighs both ways. The mutually beneficial and long-term relationship between Igbos and Yorubas in Lagos, cemented in intertribal marriages, long-term, intricate and rewarding business relationships, and decades of successful political collaboration cannot be jettisoned because of some individuals who have no or poor sense of history.
The necessary mediation to restore normalcy to the tensed areas. And that's the news. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Ruth Aguele. My sign language interpreter is Franklin Efe. Bye.